Good morning, everyone. Happy Halloween. It's also my birthday. And for my birthday, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run down an update of 20 players. So hope you enjoy it, and let's get it started. First off, we're going to talk about DK Metcalf, who has that MCL injury. He didn't practice on Wednesday, but they do think that he's got a good shot at practicing today. If he suits up at any point of time this week, I wouldn't hesitate about starting him up. We've talked before about how MCLs are able to be played through in grade 1 situations, which it seems like he has. They heal back amazingly because they have a blood supply from the inferior and superior genicular arteries, unlike most other ligaments, which don't have a good blood supply. So there's very rare cases in which they need surgery, even in complete tears. Now, some situations where they do require surgery are at the tibial attachment, which is where they attach at the bottom. If that's torn off, sometimes it can retract, and that needs to be surgically repaired because it gets caught up in the hamstring. There's some chatter about him getting traded, but we don't know where to, so we'll have to see what the landing spot is. But for right now, in the Seahawks offense, he is back-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. Now we can talk about TJ Hockenson, who also had an MCL injury as well as an ACL injury. So he has had about a year recovery, but he's not even going to be on a snap count this upcoming week. I do think that he is a start. I think that he's going to be a great addition, and tight ends usually respond pretty well to ACL recovery. Their route running isn't as deep down the field, so they're able to manage it a little bit better. So TJ Hockenson is a start this weekend. That's also because he's been one of the top tight ends in fantasy football, and in his Keaton Mitchell, he's another ACL injury, man. We got a lot of these. So with the ACL, it typically takes over a year to recover from, but he's a burner. He had 8.3 yards per carry. I do think he's definitely worthwhile at least stashing on your bench if you have some space. It's time to drop some dead weight players that haven't been performing all season. If you've been hoping that they'll be a sleeper pick, it's time to offload them and pick up some new possible sleepers. So Keaton Mitchell, he's in a crowded backfield, but I would say that he's worth. The Rico dowdle didn't play because he had a fever, and a lot of people thought that that was pretty suspicious, but it's not actually that suspicious. It sounds like he had a fever of 100.8, which is the qualifying temperature for a fever. He took some antipyretics or some medication that's supposed to suppress a fever, like Tylenol, ibuprofen, but his fever actually went up to 102. So in that situation, you can't really have a player go out there and play in close contact with others because you're not really sure if he's contagious, and if he's contagious and you have him out there, then you have the risk of being a contagion source to an entire team or the opposing team. So people said that he was taking pictures afterwards, he was acting in good spirits, and that's probably because he felt pretty good aside from the fever. But without knowing what's causing the fever, you can't put these players in these uncontrolled situations. Also, playing with the fever is a risk because it interferes with your body's thermoregulatory system. So in controlled exercise, it's been shown to possibly boost the immune system a little bit, but in a game like football, where you're literally going to your peak endurance, your body's not gonna be able to regulate it as well. So that's why the Rico dowdle situation isn't as concerning to me, and I do think that he will likely play this upcoming week. No issues. So Tyreek Hill, he missed practice on Wednesday with this foot injury that they've been talking about for a little while. I don't think it's a big deal. I think it's just a vet day, but they have been talking about possibly some rumors about him being traded to the Texans. Now, that would be not great for Nico, but it would still not really affect Tyreek. So I'm not super concerned about these rumors, and I'm not really worried about this foot injury as well. It seems like a vet rest day. We talk about foot injuries, we're only really concerned if it's this Lisfranc region over this first metatarsal, because of the ligaments that stabilize that region are pretty much the only stabilizing force. There's not really great bony junctions that solidify that stabilization. So when you injure a ligament in that Lisfranc injury, it's extremely painful. It's on the medial part or the inside part of the foot, which is responsible for the major weight bearing, and that's why it's such a long recovery. But there's been no indication that Tyreek has been suffering. Josh Jacobs, another player who missed practice on Wednesday that I'm not overly concerned about. He's another player who's been often injured throughout his career and has played through a ton of injuries. They talked about it being an ankle injury, and he was able to play through it. It sounds like he's gonna practice today as well. So that tells me that it's a low ankle sprain and not a high ankle sprain. The high ankle sprains are the ones that stabilize the upper part of the ankle and that you're not able to play through because the ligaments are the only stabilizing force that are preventing that tibia and that fibula from separating. Whereas the low ankle ligaments, you can see there's a bunch of them. There's the talofibular ligament, the anterior and the posterior one, as well as the calcaneal fibular ligament as well, and that's only on the outside of the foot. You also have the inside low ankle ligaments, and then you also have the bony anatomy of the talus bone, the tibia, and the fibula that are stabilizing that joint. So when you injure one of those low ankle ligaments, it's pretty much just a little bit of rest, but then you're able to play through it, and actually a little bit of exercise has been shown to improve the recovery. Ankle braces are also not really useful in this. I got a couple questions on Matt Milano as well. So he had torn that bicep tendon, and the interesting thing about bicep tendon ruptures is that you actually have two bicep tendons that go off your bicep muscle, the one that goes up through that bicipital groove that we see there, and then the one that goes on the inside and attaches to that backbone over there. So the thing about it is the bicep tendon on that left side ruptures, you get what's called a Popeye muscle. So that means like the muscle really bunches up like the Popeye character, and you feel it right away, but it is only about a 6 to 7 week recovery. When they do the surgical repair, they actually don't reattach it just because that groove is so prone to injury that they actually just attach it down at the humerus bone. So I do think that Matt Milano has a really good shot at returning in December as projected, and he should be able to be a football force. There's not too much recovery that needs to take place here, and obviously he's not really going to be catching any footballs. So let's talk about Tyler Higbee. So he tore that ACL as well as that MCL. Should be another player that's a candidate for return this season and should be a functional player. We already talked about how the tight end routes are a little bit better to compensate for an ACL rupture post-repair. The reasoning is that's because wide receivers, they got to run really long routes down the field. Running backs, they got to go between the tackles. And tight ends are able to avoid a little bit of that. So that's why they're able to typically recover a little bit better the season after from an ACL, MCL. So Nico Collins, not really too much update here, except that he's on track for a Week 10 return, and barring Tyreek Hill's trade to the Texans, I think that Nico Collins is going to be a stud, and I would be trying to trade for him. The other player is T. Higgins. Sounds like he is practicing, but he had that hamstring injury and that quad injury, so I think while he's out there, he's going to be a stud, and he has a good shot of playing this week. But if he blows up, I'll be trying to trade him because his re-injury risk is so high with two soft tissue injuries. About Pacheco in terms of a recent update, but I still do project him back around week 11, week 12, and I don't expect him to be viable until the fantasy football playoffs, where I do think that he is going to be in a bell cow role based on the fibula, good repair, good recovery process as well. We can touch base on Nick Chubb for a little bit. He's had 2 games. The first game he had, I think, about 2.5 yards per carry. He did score a touchdown there. The second game, he only had about 50 yards, but his yard per carry did go up to 3.2 yards. I think it's kind of going to hover around that region. I don't think that he's going to ramp up to a real significant force, and that's nothing on him. That's the fact that he had his second major knee injury, and he's only about a year out from that. And the Browns' offensive line isn't that great, although it does seem like Winston might be opening up a little bit more opportunity for Chubb. But at this point in time, I don't have super high hopes, although I'll be pleasantly surprised and happy for Chubb if he does start taking over. Dallas Goedert seems like he had a grade 2 hamstring. He hasn't practiced or played in a while. He has also not practiced this past Wednesday. I don't think he's playing this week, and I don't think he's going to play week 10 either, with them having a short Thursday week turnaround on week 11. So I do think that we see him back week 11, and I think he should be good, but he does have a moderate re-injury risk. But while he's out there, he should be a viable fantasy start once again with the shallow tight end pool. Sticking with hamstrings, Thielen's coming back, and he had a 1,000-yard season last season, so he's another player that I would just pick up and just stash if he's on the waivers. Just with Deontay Johnson getting traded, I do think that opens up a good amount of targets for Thielen, and it sounds like he's well rested. That hamstring, most likely that buys up for Morris, as we've talked about extensively. So I think that Thielen's a good sleeper pick at this point in time. Just stash him. There's no harm that can happen here.